Oh, good morning, everyone. And before I get started, I just have to say what our children's ministry team is doing right now with Online Kids Connect. It's unreal if you've been missing out on that. And those of you who have kids fourth grade and under, it's really who it's targeted for, although we do have some adults tuning in every week. That's awesome. But if you have kids fourth grade and under, those of us with kids older than that will tell you how fast that goes past. I know the days are long, but the years are short, and you have a very limited window to instill godly values and God's love in their hearts, and we want to be a tool to help you do that more effectively as parents. And what our kids ministry team did is they took all the hours of energy they were putting into recruiting dozens of volunteers every single week to create an amazing experience for kids right here in the room on Sunday mornings, and they just transferred all of that to creating an amazing online experience for your family to enjoy. And honestly, what they are producing, and I can say this because I have nothing to do with it, what they are producing is unreal. Just how good it is, how high quality it is, and we want your kids to be connected with God's love just like you do. So if you've been missing that every single Saturday at 9 a.m., it's a live episode of Kids Connect, and if you've been missing or have missed any, you can go to our YouTube page, Hope Lake Country. Just go to YouTube, Hope Lake Country, subscribe, and our whole library is on demand right there of all the episodes that our team has done of Kids Connect. Your kids are already wanting to watch videos on YouTube. Maybe if they did one last Minecraft video and one about God's love, the whole family would be a little better off. So that's my shameless plug for Kids Connect. But today, I want to, before I get started with the message, say to those of us who are watching in the room, and I'm so glad you're here in the room today, would you just help me in welcoming our online audience today? Let's give them a loud Hope welcome because we're glad you're with us today. I'm glad you're in the room with us today, and if this is your first Sunday here, you really picked a great Sunday to be here because today we are coming to the end of our series, and the series is called You're Not the Boss of Me, and we're learning how to say no to the we're learning how to say no to the emotions. Got choked up there. The series has been so moving. We're learning how to say no to the emotions that compete for control within our lives, because if you don't have a healthy inner life, it doesn't matter what's going on all around you or how good or bad things are in your outer life. If our inner lives are not healthy, our entire lives will be a mess. The problem is, probably nobody taught you how to do that. Nobody taught you how to cultivate a healthy inner life or a healthy heart, as the biblical authors say. We were taught how to modify our behavior. We were taught how to cultivate the right words to say, but nobody taught us how to cultivate a healthy inner life. And so what we've been doing in this series is looking at how to do that. So a couple of weeks ago, we looked at guilt, and if you are someone who has guilt in your inner life, how we can say to guilt, you are not the boss of me anymore. So if that's you and you missed, you need to go back and watch a couple of weeks ago. And then last week, we talked about anger. Anger is a boss that nobody likes in their inner life, and you certainly don't like it when someone around you has anger as their boss. So last week, we learned how to say to anger, you are not the boss of me. Now today, to wrap things up, and I had to choose which emotion to go with, it was kind of challenging because I thought, well, we could talk about fear. I've talked about fear before. We could talk about anxiety. I've talked about anxiety before. Nobody likes it when these emotions boss them around. But instead, I decided to do something that is probably not the smartest choice in the world, but fortunately for me, I have very low self-awareness, so I talk about all kinds of things I probably shouldn't talk about in church. But today, for our final emotion that we're going to talk about in this series, an emotion that competes for control of your inner life, we're going to talk about greed. Now, no one is cheering for this one, and as soon as I say it, what happens is shields go up and we get defensive and say, uh-oh, the pastor's talking about greed, because we've been conditioned, if you have spent any time in a church, we have been conditioned to translate this into give money to the church. And so we get a little defensive, and I totally understand that, and I also, on behalf of the church, will apologize because many who do what I do for a living have used this to talk about this. So just so you know up front, this is not a give money to the church kind of message. This is 100% a let's have a clean heart message. This is part of our series, You're Not the Boss of Me, and the goal of the series is not give to the church. The goal of this series, how do you cultivate a healthy inner life? And the reason why I chose this one in specific is because greed is the undercover boss. Greed is the emotion that when it exists in your heart, it is hard to recognize. See, if you have guilt in your heart, you know guilt is bossing you around. There is no question about it. If you have anger in your heart, there is no question about it. Everybody around you knows that anger is bossing you around. But greed is the emotion that will do just as much to ruin your sense of happiness and joy and peace, but it is the undercover boss. It is so hard to recognize within your heart. That's why both biblical authors and psychologists have a lot to say about greed in our inner lives. So to help us get started with that, we're actually going to start with the psychological science of it, and I hope you enjoy our final episode of The Wonder of Psychological Science.
Hi, I'm Pastor Professor. Welcome back to the wonders of psychological science. Today, we're talking about an emotion that is almost impossible to self-diagnose: greed. Psychologically speaking, greed is a desire for more money, wealth, or possessions than one requires. And greed is the master of disguise. It's almost impossible to see greed in ourselves. But now, thanks to the wonders of psychological science, we know why greedy people never think that they are greedy. It has to do with a chemical in the brain called dopamine. Dopamine is the master molecule of motivation. It's the feel-good neurotransmitter in the brain that creates feelings of pleasure. You can feel dopamine at work when you're eating your favorite meal, or planning a dream vacation, or anticipating a big payday or reward. Dopamine is the chemical that causes lab rats to press a lever over and over again, each time they receive a small hit of dopamine in the brain. Unfortunately, this dopamine reward loop can create addictive behaviors. Some illegal drugs release large amounts of dopamine in the brain, causing users to seek the same high again. Or, activities like picking up your cell phone when you don't need to can release small amounts of dopamine in the brain, creating the same addictive effect on the person. Thanks to psychological science, we understand the role that dopamine plays in greed. When you anticipate a big reward or achieve something new, the brain releases small amounts of dopamine. But once you've acquired the object, the dopamine quickly fades away, for many people, leaving a craving for another hit. Thus, they continue with the cycle of greed, pursuing and looking for the next thing to temporarily feel better. For many people, this cycle begins with an underlying, unresolved emotional issue, such as feelings of insecurity, inadequacy, or shame. The dopamine from pursuing and achieving an object or a possession or a pay raise feels so good that they forget and mask their underlying issue. But once the dopamine fades, they look for the next rush, and that's the addictive cycle of greed. And now we understand how dopamine leads to people feeling greedy without them even realizing it. All thanks to the wonder of psychological science.
So dopamine is that chemical that's released in your brain when you decide you want something and you go out to get it, and then it's finally yours. It's that incredible high, that incredible rush that hits you. I remember when I turned 30 years old, I had a neighbor across the street. This was back when my wife and I lived in Boise, and he was my age too, and he somehow talked me, I was out of shape at this time, he somehow talked me into running a road race with him and entering it. And it was a race it was only 9 miles long, but it had an elevation gain of about 1,500, 2,000 feet, something like that. And so we decided to run it, and I was terrified, so I started training, I started running, and on race day, I don't know what came over me, I was a man possessed, and I ended up finishing my first race ever, taking third place. And as my trophy for getting third place, I was awarded a Smokey the Bear camping chair. Okay, this was Idaho, remember, so it kind of made sense. And I took that camping chair home, and I set it up in my living room, and I sat on that chair for the rest of the day because I was flooded with the high of having gone out to pursue something, and I achieved it, and that chair represented everything. But after about a week, not only did I realize the chair was uncomfortable, but Kathy made me move it to the garage, and then I never really sat on it again, and I don't know where that chair is. But that's kind of how dopamine works. When we achieve the thing we set out to achieve, we feel great in the moment, but it wears off. Now, for little children, it's something simple that we set our hearts on, a Happy Meal, a plastic toy, something simple, and that dopamine rush hits. We've received something that we wanted so badly, but of course it wears off and you need something new, something more. And as we get older, the Happy Meals and the toys just get more and more expensive. And when you achieve them, there's that rush, there's that hit, there's that high, but it fades away. It just doesn't last. And that's how greed kicks into this cycle. Now, what's interesting is what psychological science knows today about greed is what Solomon told us centuries and centuries ago. Solomon wrote the book of Proverbs, the book of Ecclesiastes that we find in the Hebrew Scriptures, and there's just so much wisdom in them. But here's what he said about greed. He said, whoever loves money. Pause right there. How many of you would say, tell us in the chat or tell us in the room with a big raise your hand, I love money. Go ahead, let's put your hand up. I love money. Okay, some of you would say, okay, I don't know if I love money, but I'm interested. I mean, we're kind of seeing each other. I hope it goes somewhere, right? So we wouldn't say, I love money. Well, Solomon says, here's how you know if you love money. Whoever loves money never has money enough. Now, the reason why he says it this way is because money is a heart issue. He doesn't say whoever has money. He doesn't say whoever pursues money. He doesn't say whoever acquires money. He says whoever loves money. That's the language of the heart. It has nothing to do with how much money one actually has. He's talking about what's going on in your inner life. Whoever loves money, to love something is to set your hope on it, to set your desire on it, to set your meaning on it, to set your purpose on it. It is to look at something, anything, anyone. And it is to say, if only I have that, if only I have him, if only I have her, then I will be someone. Then I will have peace. Then I will have joy. Then I will be someone who matters. That's how the language of the heart works. That's what love is according to the biblical authors. And Solomon says, whoever loves money, whoever looks at money in that way and says, if I have that, then I will be secure. Then I will have peace. Then I will be someone. Solomon says, you need to know something. You will never have money enough. You will be like a hamster running on the wheel, always running, never getting anywhere. He continues, whoever loves wealth, again, same word, whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. This is Solomon's little litmus test. Are you satisfied with your income? Do you have enough money? If the answer is no, Solomon would say, better check that heart. Do you love money? Do you love wealth? Now, Solomon was uniquely qualified to write these words, by the way, because Solomon was, in his generation, the richest man in the world, and there was no close second. It was Solomon, and there was everyone else, a very far distant second. In fact, what Solomon did for a good chunk of his life is he did an experiment with his own life. And the experiment was, I wonder if I can find purpose and meaning and satisfaction in life if I take God out of the equation. If I take eternity out of the equation and just look to everything under the sun for meaning in this life, that's what the book of Ecclesiastes is about, I wonder if I can find satisfaction and purpose and meaning. And he tried everything. He tried accomplishment, he tried pleasure, he tried wealth, he tried everything under the sun. And what he learned in his little experiment is, if you set your heart on money, you will never have enough. Well, and here's why that is. Let's use a parallel illustration. If you have guilt in your heart, like we talked about 2 weeks ago, if you have guilty feelings in your heart, it does not matter how many wonderful and kind things you do to people around you. Other people could even look at you and they could say, you are so kind and you are so wonderful, but if guilt is in your heart, it doesn't matter how many kind things are done around you, you still feel guilty. Or let's say it's anger, like last week. Let's say anger is ruling your heart. It doesn't matter how many scores you settle. It doesn't matter how even you get. It doesn't matter how much justice is served around you. If there's anger in your heart, it doesn't matter what's going on around you. It's in your heart. Greed is the same way. If greed is in your heart, it doesn't matter how much you save, how much you acquire, what experiences you have. It doesn't matter what's going on around you. If greed is the thing that's in your heart, you will never be satisfied because it's not about your circumstances and it's not about your environment. It's about the heart. So here's what Solomon would warn us about greed. Greed is never satisfied because it's not a financial issue. It's a heart issue. Or here's to say it another way, just to really understand why greed works with this dynamic. It's important to get this dynamic. Greed is never satisfied because it's an appetite. Okay, now that we're 3 weeks past Halloween, it's probably safe to use this illustration. Parents, you know how when your kids go out harvesting candy and they come back and they dump it all out on the floor, you know that moment, they start trading with their siblings, bartering, that kind of thing. You always peek your head around the corner to see what they brought in. Why is that? You're looking for the good stuff, aren't you? Now, I don't know what your favorite Halloween candy is. Well, here, let's do this. On the count of 3, I want you to say the name of your favorite Halloween candy out loud. In the chat, write the name of your favorite Halloween candy in the chat. You ready? Say it out loud. 1, 2, 3. That's my favorite, too. Unless you said candy corn. If you said candy corn, you need to leave right now. That is not our favorite. Shameful. Whatever your favorite is, you're like, oh, once you see it, what happens? You were fine yesterday, but once you see that peanut butter cup, once you see that Kit Kat, what happens? This appetite all of a sudden springs. It wasn't there before, but you see it and it springs to life inside of you. So what do? You wait until the child goes to bed or goes to school, and you watched where they hid the stash, and you go and you pick out one, and you feed that appetite, and in the moment it feels so good, doesn't it? It feels so satisfying. Now, the very next day, the next time you have an opportunity, has the appetite gone away? It's probably grown. Why? Because appetites only grow when you feed them. I remember my mother saying when I was a kid, I'd always want a snack like around 4:35 in the afternoon, and she said, no, you'll ruin your appetite. I'm like, no, I won't. It literally comes back every time, Mom. Every time it comes back. When you feed an appetite, it doesn't get smaller. It gets bigger. If you eat a peanut butter cup every day, that appetite will grow and grow and grow. The only way to shrink an appetite is to starve it, to cut it off. It's only in denial, it's only in cutting off something that the appetite for it begins to slowly fade away. That's how greed works. That's the dynamic of greed in our lives. If you say to yourself, once I get this job, once I get this level of income, once I get this home, once I get this car, once I get this boat, whatever it is, it doesn't matter what the this is. If that's the thinking, Solomon says it's not going to work. Because greed is a matter of the heart. Greed is something that is an appetite. So that's the dynamic of greed and how it works in our lives. But what is it? I think the best definition I have ever found is written by the Apostle John. John was one of the apostles of Jesus. He lived to a very old age. And in his old age, he wrote some letters to the churches who were being persecuted. And here's what he said about greed. And it is just so insightful in 1 John chapter 3. He said, if anyone has material possessions, okay, that's me, I have material possessions, that's you, you have material possessions. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need, but has no pity on them. Now, in the narrow context, he's talking about a Christian brother or sister, another Jesus follower. That's in the narrow sense. In the broad sense, it's your fellow human being, your brother or sister in that way. If you see someone in need but has no pity on them, he asks a question. How can the love of God be in that person? Implication? It's not. If you see someone in need and there's no pity in your heart, John says you need to do a heart check. Is the love of God in your heart? More on that in a moment. Dear children, he says, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. Now, in this, we learn so much insight about the dynamic of greed and how it works in our heart. First, John tells us how we recognize it. Here's what I want you to recognize about greed. Greed is marked by a lack of concern. This is the calling card. This is the primary indicator of whether or not greed lives in your heart. It's not how much money you have. It's not how hard you work. It's not anything like that. John says if you see someone in need and don't have pity on them, that's the indicator that greed is living within you, which means that the opposite of greed is compassion. The opposite of greed is to look on someone, to take pity, and to love them with actions and in truth, John said. Now, the reason why I chose the word compassion here is because that fits our English definition of the word compassion. Here's the definition of compassion. It's sympathetic consciousness of others' distress together with a conviction to alleviate it. I see your distress, and not only am I sympathetic toward that, but I have a conviction to alleviate your distress. That's what compassion is all about. And what that tells us, therefore, is that greed is not a feeling. Greed is not a feeling. Nobody feels greedy. What we feel is a lack of concern. Nobody feels greedy. What we feel is, well, if I share, then I won't have enough. If I'm generous, then I won't have enough. We don't feel greedy. In fact, there's a very fascinating study done of the millennial generation, and here's one of the things that was noted when it comes to this whole idea. When millennials like or comment on a cause on social media, there's a good cause, someone's organizing it, if they like or comment on it, the less likely they are to financially support that cause. Now, I don't think that's limited to millennials. I think that's all of us. I think that's human nature. I look good, I'm saying the right things, but John said, let us not love with words and speech. Let us love with actions and with truth. So greed is not a feeling. Nobody feels greedy. Greed, simply speaking, is a refusal to act. To know that there are needs, to know that there are worthy causes, and to simply refuse to act. That's what greed is, according to the Apostle John. Now, he said, if anyone sees his brother or sister in need and has no pity on them, he says, how can the love of God be in that person? Now, why does he say it that way? Why does he ask that question? How can the love of God be in that person? Because when John looks at the heart of Jesus, his rabbi, when John looks into the heart of God, do you know what he saw there? He saw the opposite of greed. He saw compassion. In fact, it was John who wrote what might be the most famous verse in the Bible. John wrote, for God so, what? Loved the world. That's the language of the heart. God set his heart on you. God so loved the world that he did what people who love do. He did what people who have compassion do. He gave. He didn't love with words. He didn't love with speeches. He loved with action and truth, that he gave his one and only Son. The result, that whoever believes in him shall not perish but have eternal life. God loved, so God gave. God loved, so God gave. We believe, we receive eternal life. We receive forgiveness. We receive a new status as beloved children of God, as heirs of eternal life, and as sons and daughters of God. We want to have his heart. We want his heart and his values to guide us and motivate us and pour out of us as the people who have received such compassion, as people who have received such generosity from our Father in heaven. We are the people who live with compassion, who live with action, who live with truth, and practice true generosity. That's our legacy. That's our heritage. That's our calling as children of God. Now, knowing all of this about God's heart, and who he is and how he's generous and how he takes compassion on us, and that we are his children, and that greed is an emotion that is so hard to recognize because, again, we don't feel it. We just refuse to act like God acts. That's what greed is. We're refusing to act like God acted towards us. If all that's true, what do you think Jesus would say about greed? Here's what he said about greed in Luke chapter 12. Watch out. Be on your guard. Now pause. If you were here in part 1, Jesus is deliberately choosing language which should remind us of something. What did Solomon say in Proverbs chapter 4? Above all else, guard your heart. Jesus is choosing those words. He says, watch out, be on your guard. He's talking about the heart again. What is it that you love? What is it that you value? What is it you set your hopes and expectations on? Be on your guard against, this is interesting to me, all kinds of greed. Like, how many kinds of greed are there? Jesus says, there's all kinds. All kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions. Again, if you build a life around what I earned and what I had, Jesus will say you will get to the end of your life and then you won't have a lot to show for yourself. That's not where life is found. So he says, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Now, in our culture, we typically see two kinds of greed in America. Here's what our two kinds of greed are: consuming and hoarding. Consuming and hoarding. Consuming is, there's more stuff for me to get, and I'm going to go get it. Hoarding is, I'm going to save it for myself, save it for the future, save it for a rainy day. What if something happens? What if something goes wrong? I'm going to keep this to myself. And we don't like these words. They sound just, kind of base. So we use these words instead. Spending and saving. This is much more responsible, isn't it? Spending and saving. I'm not greedy. I'm just doing these two things, spending and saving. Now, these are the two kinds of greed we most commonly see in our country. Not that spending is wrong, not that saving is wrong. Again, greed is a matter of the heart. But when it comes to you spending your money that you earned, and when it comes to you saving your money that you earned, and biblical authors are absolutely in favor of both of those things, by the way. If you read the book of Proverbs, it has a lot to say about wealth, and both of these are recommended. But here's the question. Do you assume that it's all for you to consume? When you look at your wealth, when you look at your money, when you look at your possessions, do you have an assumption that everything that comes my way is there for me to consume now by spending, or for me to consume later by saving? Do you assume that everything that comes your way is there for you to either use for you now or for you to use for you later? Jesus would say, watch out, be on your guard against all kinds of greed. If you would say, Jason, I don't think it's all there for me to consume now or later, okay. 99% of it? 98% of it? Do you assume that it's there, the purpose is for you to consume it? Now, so far today, all I've done is I've used some biblical authors and used the words of Jesus to simply help us recognize the dynamic of greed in our hearts, how it works in our hearts, why it's so hard to recognize as we just kind of go from dopamine hit to dopamine hit, and how we can kind of see past the curtain. How does it work in our hearts? How does it work in our lives? The assumptions that go along with greed. But what do we do about that? Because we live in a culture where nobody is going to encourage you to get a hold of the greed in your heart. We just look at people on Wall Street and say, those are the real greedy people, I'm fine. Nope, greed is not about dollars. It's not about possessions. It has nothing to do with your circumstances, rich or poor. It has nothing to do with your income or anything like that. It's all about your heart. And this series is about having a clean heart, a healthy heart. So what do we do to push back against greed? How do we say to greed, you know what, I've been on this hamster wheel long enough, and I've been working really hard, and I'm still not satisfied, and I'm getting a little sick of you bossing me around. How do we push back against greed? Because when you push back against greed, do you know what finally comes in? Satisfaction. When you push back against greed, what finally comes in is a sense of peace when it comes to your financial world and a healthy heart in your inner life. So how do we push back against greed? It's really very, very, very simple. In fact, when it comes to saying to greed, you're not the boss of me, of all the emotions that boss us around, it is the simplest to execute, but you might have the most reluctance to do it. It's really very simple to push back greed. It takes 3 steps. And remember, these are action steps. When it comes to dealing with guilt, that's more of an internal thing and getting into the presence of God. Greed is the opposite. It's about 3 concrete action steps you can take, because greed is about loving in words and actions and truth. Here's the first step. Whenever money comes your way, paycheck, inheritance, whatever it is, lucky weekend in Vegas, whenever money comes your way, there are 3 things to do with it. And if you do these 3 things, you will push greed out of your life forever. You will shove it right out of your heart. First thing you do is this: give. When money comes your way, you set aside an amount. And if it's your paycheck, it should be a predetermined amount, and you give that away. Now, at this point, many people say, I knew it. Here's where he says, give the church money. I didn't say give to the church. I said give. If you think the church is after your money, I do not recommend you give it to a church. I would never give money to people or institutions I don't trust. You shouldn't either. If you don't trust us, if you don't trust me, don't give us money. But give. What's something that's broken in our world? Who's doing something about it? Give. Where are people being hurt? Who's doing something about it? Give. Make your money do something that's not all about you. Make your money do something that makes the world a better place, or that makes someone's world a better place. Pick a percentage, pick an amount. When money comes in, first thing you do, give. That's what you do. Second, save. If you want to understand what all the biblical authors have to say about money, they say wise people save for the future. That's what wise people do. Take some of that money, set it aside, save for the future. That's how the book of Proverbs teaches us how to live. And then third, live on whatever is left over. This is so un-American. Whatever is left over, you decide, I will live within this amount. Whether I like it or not, whether I can keep up with the Joneses or not, whether that affords me the car or the house or the boat I want or the clothes I want, you decide. Whatever's left over after I give first and save second, that's what I'm going to live on, and not a penny more. People who choose to do this with the wealth that they earn, the paychecks you go out and you work for, people who choose to do this are people who push back on greed, and they're people who understand what it actually means to enjoy financial freedom. Because greed will no longer be bossing you around. Now, here's the interesting dynamic. As a pastor, when I've seen people who do this, live their lives, it doesn't just stay in their inner life. Because again, greed is a hard issue, and people who push back against greed and say, you're not the boss of me, it doesn't just stay in the financial lane, because that's what our hearts do, right? Whatever's in your heart, it spills out into all of your life. And people who practice this in their lives, that generosity, it starts to spill out in all kinds of ways. And it starts to impact people in all kinds of ways. And we've got a family here at Hope, a couple here at Hope, that for years have been doing this in their life. And we just want to show you a little bit about their story.
My name is Brian Henselman.
And I'm his wife, Katie Henselman.
I've been going to Hope for about 8 years, a little past.
Yeah, I can never remember the exact number.
Yeah. We played music with some folks in the general area before, and then through that we were invited into a service one Sunday, and then we're like, whoa, this is an interesting setup. We love it here. This is, and then it was like the next weekend that we were up on stage. For being a group leader, it was a matter of there's a need. There's geographically there was an opportunity to open up our home, have people who are more coming from that side of town, and have it be a little bit more convenient, remove the friction for them. We were just generally willing and able.
And I think we had a lot of very good group experiences a lot of great leaders in previous groups, kind of as mentors.
Well, second stage, aiming at like building a building as a tool to reach others. It's something that we've been in alignment with for a long time. So as soon as we heard that, we're like, yeah, how do we help? Where can we contribute? What's needed, kind of thing. And since it was primarily a financial generosity initiative, we had been giving already, and I think we felt like we were at what felt right for us, but knowing that we needed to elevate that to help contribute to second stage was something where we needed to prayerfully consider. It ultimately came down to committing to financially giving at a level that was more uncomfortable for us. And we knew that regardless of what would happen, God would provide. And yeah, a couple months after the commitment started is when I had a new job opportunity, and that uncomfortable giving was no longer uncomfortable. So we had to take a step back again and reconsider and say, well, how do we contribute more, and how do we make it again where we're feeling like we're being more generous? It's almost like God was saying, we think you, or God was saying you could give more, right? Like you could contribute more to this initiative. And I'm going to help make that happen.
Now, especially that we are going to be starting a family, it's kind of awesome to think about our kids being able to experience all the really cool stuff that Kids Connect is able to do.
Second stage kind of leads one to believe that there was a first stage. First stage, we weren't really involved in. We were the beneficiaries of it, right? There was a small, tight-knit group of people who said there's a need in the community. Let's start this church. And we were one of those people who ended up coming to that. One of those people who ended up saying, hey, this is impacting our lives. And it was all because of the generosity of that small group. And what we're seeing second stage as is that the next level to elevate us to have the tools necessary to really reach people beyond what we've done thus far. We thought that we could start contributing, and that's what the second stage is all about, is how do we get to that next level of being able to reach the unchurched.
How do you know Katie and Brian? I would see them a lot at church, when they're playing or singing, but that was about it.
I met Brian and Katie when they first started volunteering at Hope in the music ministry.
The first time I met them, I thought, this is like the most adorable dating couple I've ever met.
I met Brian and Katie when I first started playing in the Hope band a few years ago. And last year I joined the group that they were leading, and I'm in their group again this year.
I got to know them a lot better when I joined their group.
Greg and I have just started becoming part of their small group this fall, and we're really enjoying it. They definitely have the gift of hospitality.
Every time they make me feel like they want me there. That's what I have felt every single time without fail when I arrive.
And they interact with everyone around them just so genuinely, and I really admire the way they treat other people and the way they treat each other.
Cooper, their dog, his welcoming game is A+. Every time I showed up, he would run back and forth in a yard for me. He makes me feel like I'm the most important person in the house, in the world. He makes me feel like I'm Justin Bieber. Yeah, Nathan, maybe cut that.
They're just really hard workers at Hope and are really dedicated to Hope's ministry.
They're super kind and just really pure-hearted people.
Brian and Katie have impacted me on a personal level, just in their encouragement for me and concern for me when I've gone through difficult times.
Right before we started second stage, I met with Brian and Katie and told them about what we're doing and where we're heading. And all he said was, Jason, you can count on us. We are in.
And I think their generous spirit is probably obvious to everybody who knows them.
I've seen over and over how they're so generous with their time, with their life, with their influence, and invest in other people with everything they do.
Thanks, Brian and Katie.
Brian and Katie, thank you so much for serving and having such incredible hearts for the kingdom, for Hope Church, and for our mission. Thanks, guys.
That was unexpected. It's easier to be generous when you recognize the generosity of people around you, and how we wouldn't be where we are in our lives without the generosity of others. And that all just points to God sacrificing his only son for us. And it can't get any better than that. So it's really just on us to do our small part to try to make that known for other people.
Generosity really does generate change. It changes our hearts, and it says to greed, you are not the boss of me, and I will not let you be the boss of me. But it also changes the world around us. Because that's what it looks like to love like God loves us. To give, to be generous, to change lives and eternities all around us. 2 years ago, in December of 2018, for those of you who are new to Hope, what we decided to do as a church is we decided that we were going to start a 2-year generosity initiative. And Brian and Katie mentioned that. That's what they mentioned with Second Stage, to kind of hit those rockets and get to the elevation we need to get to as a church to accomplish our mission. And that's what this has been about. And you guys, you just rose up and you answered the bell. What I asked you to do one thing. You go before God and you ask him, when it comes to give, save, live in your life, what should that look like for you for this 2-year period? What should your level of generosity look like for this 2-year period? You go to God and ask that, and you just do whatever God asks you to do. I'm not going to ask you to do anything. You just do whatever God asks you to do. And that's what you did. And that generosity has generated so much change in our world. And there's 2 big things I have to highlight. Number 1, we made so much progress. We completely evolved as a digital church. And we didn't know 2020 was coming. We didn't know the pandemic was coming. God did. And because of your generosity, we were absolutely positioned to turn on a dime and really become what the church needs to be, because the future of the church is absolutely digital. The internet is the most revolutionary, disruptive technology perhaps in the history of the world, and we are better and better utilizing it to change lives and eternities like never before, because you decided to do what God asked you to do. But we've also made advances with physical and in-person church, as we've been able to now break ground on our new church facility. And in fact, if you drive by on your way home, you'll see that they are hard at work excavating, and there's beautiful piles of dirt. I never thought piles of dirt could look so beautiful and exciting. They do now. And we're moving forward with our ability to reach people and minister to people in our community. And that building is going to not just be a church building, it's going to be a beautiful broadcast tower that we use to communicate the love of Jesus to the world. Generosity generates change. So, I don't know where you're at with Hope Church. I don't know where you're at with Jesus. I don't know where you're at with God. And I don't know where you're at with greed and generosity. So I'm going to give a few takeaways for some different groups of us depending on where you're at today. For those of you who are new to Hope and you haven't been doing Give, Save, Live yet, here's my challenge for you. Start to do that. If you don't trust us yet, again, don't give it to us. This isn't about raising money for a church. This is about your Father in heaven who wants you to live with a clean heart, and greed is that undercover boss. You start picking a percentage, you start picking an amount, and the first thing you do with your paycheck, you give that away to people who are making the world a better place. Then you save, and then you live on whatever's left over. For those of us who are newer to Hope, but you've reached the decision, this is my church. I want to be part of this mission. Then when you decide what give, save, live looks like, then you give some of that here, because we are on a mission and we have an ambitious future. I don't think we're a church that's arrived. I think we're a very small church with a very big vision for the future and reaching people and changing lives in eternities. And we would love for you to partner with us in helping us. Like Brian and Katie said, some people came and started this and we received the benefits. We want to continue this so more and more people can have healthy hearts that live in the presence of their Father in heaven. For those of you who've been at Hope a while and you've been part of the second stage initiative, there's barely over 5 weeks left and it's over. Somebody asked me, okay, is this one of those church things or there's going to be a third stage after this one? Nope, there isn't. This is it. And there's just over 5 weeks left to be part of this. So finish strong with your commitment. That's what I'm asking you to do. And for all of us, no matter where you're at with Hope, no matter where you're at with generosity today, I've got one request for you. Come January 1st, and our church is done with the second stage initiative and we're moving forward as normal, would you do something? Would you get on your knees before your Father in heaven and say, thank you for multiplying what we put into your hands? And would you just show me, what should my level of generosity look like be this new year? And then you just do whatever God asks you to do. And when you do that, you will put your finger in the chest of greed and you will say, greed, you are not the boss of me. I have a Lord, his name is Jesus, and he allows me to live with a clean heart that is filled with peace, that is filled with optimism, that is filled with joy, and that it is so satisfied and thankful. Let's pray. Father in heaven, this week as our country observes Thanksgiving, I ask that that would be true in our hearts. No matter what our gatherings look like this year, I ask that our hearts would be filled with gratitude for who you are, for your kindness and mercy and grace and blessing in our lives. And that we would fully lean into our identity as children of God, and we would be like you, people who love with actions and in truth. So give us the courage to trust you with our finances. Give us the courage to obey you when it comes to being generous people, so that we can have a greater blessing than a few extra dollars to save or consume. We would have the blessing of being people with clean hearts and the freedom that comes from that. And we would get to watch you show up and take what we've put in your hands and watch you multiply it to make our world a better place and to even change people's eternal destinations. I ask for this blessing for everyone listening in Jesus' name.